Good afternoon, delegates, and welcome back to session 2 in regards to government responses to the pandemic. And this session is a virtual address. Before we start, welcome back to our online participants. I just want to remind you, everyone, that questions can be submitted during the presentation via your attendee app, your conference app, or via the Q&A button on your conference website. If you are attending in person, you can also put questions at the end of the session. This session, as I said, is about government responses to the pandemic, and we're very pleased to welcome online the Honourable Ratu Nailatikau, who is a Fijian chief who has had a long career in the military, in diplomatic services and the government. From 2001 to 2006, he served as Speaker of the House of Representatives. He served as President of Fiji from 2009 to 2015 and was elected again as the Speaker of the Fijian Parliament in February 2019. He will talk to us about how the Fijian Parliament has responded to the pandemic, and a very warm welcome to you.
Honourable Alana Kolesi, President of the Legislative Council of the Parliament of Western Australia, Honourable Michelle Roberts, Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of Western Australia, colleagues and fellow participants, thank you for hosting this regional conference amid these challenging times. It is unfortunate for us that we are unable to be there at the conference in person, but COVID-19 requirements, as you know, are demanding and had to be strictly followed. I wish to share with you the Fijian Parliament's experience and response to the effects of the pandemic, particularly in terms of our efforts to ensure that parliamentary business and Parliament's core constitutional functions are not hindered by the multiple fallouts from this national and global public health crisis. It is obvious that the pandemic has tested the adaptability and resilience of parliaments around the world in ensuring that our functions and parliamentary democracy are not impeded. The border closures, lockdowns, inter-island travel bans, curfews, social distancing, and other restrictive public health measures brought about by the pandemic has doubled the burden on many parliaments. From our experience, Parliament has had to face two challenges. Firstly, Parliament itself, like everyone else, had to comply with COVID-19 safe protocols and emergency public health regulations. In Fiji, the establishment of containment zones and the implementation of nationwide curfews had barred many members from outside the capital city of Suva from attending the House sittings. Standing committees were also unable to meet physically, conduct public hearings, and make site visitations in their inquiries. Our own COVID-19 safe protocols meant there were no parliament tours or community outreaches. there were also restrictions to contractors or service providers. Secondly, the pandemic has required parliaments to take legislative action and facilitate the government's and the national response to the pandemic. This requirement is added on to its existing legislative and oversight agenda, which includes pending legislative business that are works in progress. I will briefly share some brief statistics with you. Fiji had remained relatively COVID-free in the early months of the pandemic. The first wave of locally transmitted infections began in March 2020, originating from a returning citizen. A quick government response through lockdowns and curfews enabled us to reduce community transmissions by April 2020. On November 4th, 2020, Fiji had experienced 200 days without any transmissions of COVID-19 in the community. Only 2 lives were lost during the first pandemic. The second, more devastating wave began in April this year. July was a particularly dangerous month, with a record 1,405 new cases recorded for the 16th of that month. With the second wave of transmissions, the government had implemented stringent public health responses. This included mandatory masks in public places and a concerted public vaccination campaign. A total of 674 people have since died from COVID-19 in Fiji, with 671 or 99.7% of these during the second wave. As of 1st November this year, Fiji had recorded a total of 52,180 cases with 49,860 recoveries, or 95.6%. As of 1st October, there were 1,218 active cases with patients either in hospital or in home containment. Community transmissions have been reduced greatly over the last 3 months. COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns have gradually eased beginning in the first week of October due to reduced transmissions, but mostly because of the increased public vaccination rates. As of 1st November, 597,083 persons, or 96.5% of the target adult population, have received the first dose of the vaccines, while 542,582 persons, or 87.8%, are now fully vaccinated with the second dose. COVID-19 restrictions will ease further when the fully vaccinated target adult population reaches 90%. There has also been a concerted effort to have vaccine protection for young Fijians. The rollout of the Moderna vaccine for 15 to 17 years old began on 20th September. As of 1st November this year, 31,923 had received their first dose, while 17,650 had received their second dose. The Ministry of Health and Medical Services plans to roll out the PIPSA vaccine for children aged 12 to 15 years on 15th November. Vaccinations for children is not mandatory. The vaccination program follows strict protocols such as parental consent, and the presence of a parent is required when a child gets his or her shot. Plans are in place for Fiji to reopen its borders to travel partner countries from November 11 onward. A full national border opening is also planned for the 1st December. Whilst restrictions have been reduced gradually, we still have active cases and certain aspects of our COVID-19 public health regulations are still in force. While we are slowly recovering, it is important to be reminded that the pandemic has devastated the Fijian economy, business activity, employment, and impacted socio-economic conditions. As noted by government, Fiji's economy is expected to have contracted by 15.7%. For the current financial year, tax revenues are expected to be 43% lower than pre-COVID levels. Parliament has had to work against the backdrop of the pandemic, but has progressed in adapting to the new normal. We have had to implement COVID-19 safe protocols in Parliament through the restriction of movement in and out and within parliamentary offices. These include social distancing in the plenary and internal office meetings are held virtual. We also had to comply with the Health and Safety at Work Amendment Regulations 2021, which require all employers and employees entering a workplace to be fully vaccinated and to be the norm by 1st November 2021. All of our staff and MPs are now fully vaccinated. The Fijian Parliament's ability to continue parliamentary issues amidst the COVID-19 pandemic is attributed to the timely investment in its e-Parliament initiative, which started in 2018 and included the development and strengthening of its IT facilities to ensure effective online or virtual communications. The target was enhancing Parliament's accessibility to citizens for information resources and access to committee inquiries. But it became crucial in ensuring the continuity of business during the lockdowns that were instituted to counter the transmission of the coronavirus. This initiative was due to the successful partnership between the Fijian Parliament, the government, and our development partners of Australia, Japan, and New Zealand that was facilitated under the United Nations Development Programme Fiji Parliament Support Project. A second wave of COVID-19 infections began in April 2021, compelling lockdowns as directed by the Ministry of Health and Medical Services. However, we have been able to have hybrid sittings from 25th May to 7th June to pass important legislation, and which also allowed parliamentary oversight on the government's COVID-19 response. The hybrid sitting was a milestone in the history of the Fijian Parliament and parliamentary democracy in Fiji. The hybrid sittings continued for the passing of the national budget and appropriation bill in July, and for the sitting weeks of August and September. A full in-person sitting of Parliament was convened on 22nd October to appoint Fiji's new president. This was possible due to the easing of COVID-19 restrictions and the strictly supervised reopening up of local containment borders. For the hybrid sitting, more than 50% of the members attended the sitting virtually, with the remainder attending in person and observing Parliament's COVID-19 safe protocols. In total, we had 94% daily attendance in the period during which we had containment lockdowns, curfews, and a ban on inter-island travel. During these hybrid sittings, committee reports and bills were tabled, debated, and passed by acclamation, and were televised live on free-to-air TV and live streamed on Parliament's website and Facebook page. It should be acknowledged that the standing committees had already been meeting virtually since April 2020, undertaking inquiries and hearings throughout Fiji where interested citizens and stakeholders made virtual submissions. The hearings had also been live streamed on Facebook, allowing public access. Despite the lockdowns, Parliament has been able to continue its business in plenary and committees by working virtually. Remaining relevant and engaged. The hybrid sitting have ensured that Parliament's legislative and oversight agenda continues. Fijians have been able to access standing committee inquiries and public hearings virtually. The live streaming of Parliament sittings and committee hearings have ensured a wider reach, keeping Fijians informed and engaged with the business of Parliament, and thereby generating much public debate. Adapting parliamentary procedures and practices. We note that some parliaments in the Pacific have difficulty in having virtual sittings or virtual committee engagements. Also, in addition to the IT infrastructure and connectivity challenges, some have been hindered by standing orders, constitutions, or statutes that do not allow virtual sittings or remote parliamentary work. The Fijian Parliament has been able to undertake the hybrid sittings while allowing committees to work virtually because of the provisions provided for in the standing orders that give the Business Committee and the Speaker the power to convene sittings of Parliament. The Speaker has additional powers to do everything necessary or convenient in connection with the performance of his or her functions under the standing orders. In this new normal, parliaments should evolve and adapt their rules or procedures to allow parliamentary processes to continue, which is essential for the continuance of parliamentary democracy. Parliaments must make the necessary changes to their practices, procedures, and work culture to adapt to the effects of the pandemics and other diseases. Bridging the gap between the people and the state. The virtual committee hearings and Parliament sittings have ensured transparency and access to information for many Fijians, whose movements have been hampered by the lockdowns. Fortunately for members of Parliament, the Secretariat had been quietly conducting its training well before the pandemic surfaced and was therefore well prepared and have continued to display great resourcefulness in providing the ongoing essential backup services. This continuity of Parliament enables oversight as members of Parliament raise questions and engage in debate on government's COVID-19 response strategy. This is essential for the continuance of parliamentary democracy. I thank you for your attention.
I'm very saddened to hear the devastation that the pandemic has wreaked on your beautiful country, but also very pleased to hear the responsiveness and the resilience of the Fijian people, government and parliament. So thank you very much for your contribution. Members, are there any questions? And while members are, we're just looking online, first of all, to see if there's anything coming through online, I might exercise the chair's privilege in asking Honourable Speaker a few questions. My first question is about your hybrid sittings. And you mentioned that your enabling mechanism to carry out hybrid sittings was your standing orders for your Parliament. Can I ask, were there any concerns about members being able to vote while participating online? And were there any constitutional barriers to holding a hybrid sitting, including the ability for members to vote? Thank you.
Thank you. As I had mentioned in my speech, our ability to carry out those sittings is well defined in our standing orders, which gives the power to the standing committee and to the business committee and to the speaker. It's clearly outlined for that. And for this, the first sitting we had, the business committee met on a flying minute. Because of the urgency of that. And we agreed to the sitting over the weekend for it to start on the Tuesday. And we had that meeting. It was the demands of the COVID. No one objected to that. And we've carried on from there.
Thank you. From other jurisdictions, we've been hearing of different barriers to enabling hybrid sittings, and so your mechanism to enable your hybrid sitting through your standing orders is very interesting to us, and might also serve to some of our jurisdictions to look more closely at the way in which it has been enabled in your country. So thank you. That's been very interesting. The second question I have is around your health and safety at work legislation, and whether, and so that obviously enabled your Parliament to continue to operate in some form. What kinds of things are included in that legislation? And in particular, I note your very high level of vaccination rates, and whether mandatory vaccination was included in your health and safety at work legislation. Thank you.
There was, during the discussions of that, the question of no jab, no job. And people had the choice. If you wanted to take the jab, you took the jab. the first one and the necessary second jab. But if you didn't want to take that, either the first or the second, there was the choice for you to do, and you didn't take it, you didn't have a job. And many have lost their job. In Parliament, we had one secretary who discussed the situation with the husband, and they agreed that she didn't take the jabs. So she had to leave. And that affected everybody. There was no exceptions. And you had the choice. Have the jab, look after yourself, look after your neighbor, look after the community. And we'll get around and get on top of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to add something to your first question.
Mm-hmm.
You see, we didn't anticipate having a hybrid city in the first place, although it was there in our standing orders. But we were quietly working on it. Our staff was quietly working on it, if the case should come up. And when it did come up, we were ready. And I think we surprised so many people with that. So I give the credit to our staff who were on the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were called to do it, we did it.
Yes, and thank you for noting the work of your staff as well in relation to this. And I think that's the unique nature of your enabling mechanism, I think is of interest to a lot of delegates here. And congratulations to your Parliament and your parliamentary staff in enabling your Parliament to continue in such very difficult times. Your country is made up of somewhere near 300 islands, and I note that you talk about the restrictions in relation to inter-island visits. That must have been something very deeply shocking to your communities, but also very difficult to manage, I should imagine, given the very close relationships across the islands. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind commenting on how that was implemented in your country and some of the issues that you faced in those mandatory restrictions.
Well, the first thing, there was a total stop of anyone going from one island to another. All movements to the island were restricted. Stopped, but they were monitored because there was a need to send supplies and for medical emergencies. That's how it was worked out. But people realized that they had to follow those protocols. And in places where we thought there might be a slip up, we strengthened that. Government strengthened that. It didn't satisfy everybody. There was complaints from people in the main islands not being able to go to the outer islands and vice versa. But it was a necessity that had to be carried out. And we've managed. At the moment, we've eased travel restrictions, although in places they're still being monitored very closely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Delegates, are there any questions from the floor? Are there any questions online? No. Honourable Speaker, we thank you very much for your contribution and for allowing us some insight into the incredible work that the Parliament has been undertaking. And we thank you also for your time, and we wish you luck in opening of your country in about 2 weeks' time, I think. So, and know that our thoughts and wishes are with you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the plans at the moment. It's the planning stage. When we get there, we will look at the situation, and government then will decide whether we extend that or do the opening. But thank you. Thank you for your concerns.
Okay, and thank you for your time. Delegates, that concludes this session and the conference for today. Our formal program recommences tomorrow, Wednesday the 3rd of November at 8:30 a.m. Western Standard Time, and online delegates, we look forward to your participation then. Local delegates, we have a further part to the program which continues from now, including a tour of Parliament House and our conference dinner this evening. So that concludes today's formal events. Thank you.